Those guys are a lot of fun. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? That was Keep Alive singing Al Hanisim. It's a little early, but we might as well start thinking about Hanukkah. That song is that we thank you, God, for the miracles that you wrought for us in this season at that time. And we recite that for Hanukkah and for Purim. Hanukkah's not that far away. If you have people you want to get Hanukkah gifts for, you could do worse than to get one of the nice t-shirts that we have in the Accidental Talmudist store. Nina will put the link in the comments, but it's shop@accidentaltalmudist.org. Let's light up the darkness. All right, who's with us on this fine evening? And by the way, if you get any of these t-shirts at our store, it supports our nonprofit. All right, who is with us tonight? James from Indianapolis, Stephen from Dover, New Hampshire, Carol from Cleveland, Pauline from Arkansas, Chaim from Charlotte. He says, good evening, I love your class. Thank you, Chaim. Deborah from Florida, Melissa from Great Neck, New York, Sharon from Lebanon, New Jersey, Sella from Timor-Leste. I'm not sure where that is, but welcome, Sella. Carol is commenting on the elections, and I will not be commenting on the election. This is a politics-free zone. Let's enjoy that. Anne from Merced, Linda from Florida, David from Oregon, Nancy from North Carolina, Suzanne from Nashville, Matt says shalom, Guy with us from Ohio, Penny says shalom, Laura from Lake Shastina in California, Chantel from the Florida Panhandle, Diana from San Diego. Welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here. And Marjorie over on the YouTube side from Georgia. All right. So, where are we holding? Excuse me. This is Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud, Tractate Eruvin. We're on Daf Pei Zayin. That's page 87. We are in chapter 8, and we're completing our discussion of the 6th Mishna of chapter 8, and we're going to begin and complete the 7th Mishna and open our discussion of the 8th Mishna. These are some tight little Mishnas with not so much discussion about them, so we can keep things moving. Excuse me. I should always have a glass of water here. Anyway, let's see. So yesterday we were discussing what happens when there's a be'er, a well, that is located under the boundary between two courtyards. And the question was, can the people draw water into their courtyard from this shared well? Shared in the sense that it's on the boundary between the two courtyards. And so they both have access to the well. And the concept here is that the two courtyards, they each have an Eruv established within their courtyards. People have made an Eruv. They've deposited some food into the common basket so that all the residents of each courtyard, and there has to be 2 or more homes in each courtyard, or no Eruv would be required. They've done that. Each courtyard has its Eruv, so they can carry objects in and out of their homes to their courtyard on Shabbos, both on this side and on that side, but they don't have a joint Eruv, so they can't carry objects from one courtyard to the other. So, and why is this an issue when they're drawing water from the well? Because the well is in both courtyards, and let's just look at that figure again. Makes it a little bit easier to visualize. Give me 1 second. And we're not going to go through all the laws of yesterday, but just so we know what we're talking about. So that would be the well beneath the wall between the two courtyards. That's the concept that we're talking about. And so they could draw water from it on both sides if they put a partition in it. Rabbi Yehuda said that the wall over the well is enough to be a symbolic partition. And they argue back and forth. There were a few older holdings from Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about extending, making a more definitive partition below the wall that actually reaches the level of the water in the well. Ultimately, the law was that we do need some kind of an extension below the wall that reaches the surface of the water. Rabbi Yehuda was more lenient. He would have just allowed the wall over the well to be enough. And actually, Rabbi Yehuda was not really far off, because later we saw that it was also enough to have a cross beam over the well, as long as that beam is very significant. It's 4 handbreadths wide or more. That's a pretty significant cross beam to extend over the well. The question was asked yesterday towards the end of class, isn't there a problem where the well is more than 10 handbreadths deep and its bottom is more than 4 handbreadths wide? And that is our definition of a separate private domain. We've seen that rule over and over again in our journey through the Talmud, that on Shabbos, it's going to be a problem transferring something from one domain to another, and something which is at least 10 handbreadths above the ground level of a different domain or below the ground level, a pit or a mound, and its bottom or its top is at least 4 by 4 handbreadths wide, actually counts as a separate domain. So the question was asked, well, if we take water from the well, which counts as its own domain, doesn't it, into the private domain of either one of the courtyards, is that in itself a prohibited transfer? It was assumed that it's not a prohibited transfer because we were looking at what kind of symbolic partition we have to make to deal with this well, with respect to the fact that it occupies some space in 2 neighboring courtyards that didn't make an Eruv between them. And in that discussion, it was just a given that, well, you can take water from the well. You just can only do that if the partition exists, so you're not taking water from the side of the other courtyard when we're not permitted to take objects from that courtyard into this courtyard. So I wasn't sure how to answer the question. It seemed like a problem to me too. Today I had a discussion with, actually I called two experts. I called Rav Parry and Rabbi Abish, the 2 guys who substituted for me when we took a family vacation over the summer. And I talked it through with them, which was wonderful. It's always great to learn with people with a lot of background. And it was not an easy question. Both of them had to really think about it, and we kind of went back and forth and through the issues. And basically where they came out is that when you have a well, and it doesn't have to be between the courtyards. This would be the same problem if you had a well in the middle of your backyard, right? Wouldn't you be drawing water from one private domain into another? That's rabbinically prohibited. Biblically prohibited to take an object on Shabbos from a private domain to a public domain, or from a public domain to a private domain. From private domain to private domain, that's a different kind of a problem. Usually requires an Eruv that joins those domains. At any rate, the reason why the well, which is a pit, that is more than 10 handbreadths deep and has a certain amount of space at the bottom, that is a separate domain. But when it comes to drawing water, as we've seen several times, there are special leniencies, and this is going to be one of them. And so the well becomes mevatel to the courtyard. What does that mean? It is nullified, right? It's not going to count as a separate domain because you're taking water into your own courtyard. The well is subsumed in the private domain, which is the courtyard. In other words, it'd be a pretty good feature to have a well in ancient times, since they didn't have running water and pipes, from the city reservoir. A lot of people had wells in their own courtyard, and it would really be a bummer if you couldn't draw water from your own well in your courtyard on Shabbos because it counted as a separate domain. And it didn't. It didn't count as a separate domain, at least for purposes of Shabbos. You could draw the water out because that well, separate domain as it might be, is subsumed into the courtyard. So that's how we answered that question. Okay. Right. And we talked about that Rabbi Yehuda said that the wall over the well is enough, and that was another leniency. And with the crossbeam, that actually became, they didn't talk about the crossbeam as a wall, but it acts like a wall. It acts like a partition that's significant. We saw that a wall that's 4 handbreadths wide and 10 handbreadths high, that's a significant wall that would divide 2 courtyards from each other. And if there was no passageway between them, they would not have the option of making a joint area between 2 such courtyards because it's a significant wall. Less than 4 handbreadths wide, it does not have that same significance. And in fact, in that case, they might even have to join the courtyards because they don't have a significant wall between them. Today, we're going to learn another leniency with respect to drawing water on Shabbos. And this time, it's the case of a balcony or a platform over water. We've talked a little bit about this idea that you could have a lakefront building, an apartment building, and the residents have a balcony that is literally over the water. And then there's the question, well, on Shabbos, can they draw water up to their balcony from the lake below so that they would have, fresh drinking water, assuming you could drink from the lake. But, back then they didn't have so much pollution in the lake. There weren't motorboats spewing gas and oil and whatever into the lake. So it's a little bit more okay. At least for washing. We're not even talking about drinking water. Not that you're washing on Shabbos. So I guess you are talking about drinking water. Okay. So if you have such a balcony, we've seen that, and we're going to be discussing it again later today, that the decree that the sages made was, okay, if you have a hole in the balcony, you can draw water up through the hole so long as you made mechitzos, partitions around that hole, either above the hole or below the hole. And so we actually have a drawing, a figure like that, just so you can easily picture it. It's actually coming from something we're going to talk about later for a different reason. But, so here's 2 examples of balconies over water. Balconies over water. And they would be allowed to draw water in a bucket up through the hole in the balcony, provided that there were these partitions that are 10 handbreadths high, either above the hole or below the hole. Now, clearly, these partitions don't extend all the way down to the water. But we make a legal ruling that it's as if they extend down to the water. And now, because of that, you're not pulling water from the lake, which is neither a private domain nor a public domain. It's a carmelis. That's a legal definition of a large area that is neither a private domain nor a public domain. So it's called a carmelis. And it's prohibited on Shabbos to take an object from a carmelis into a private domain. So you can't take water from the lake into your house, which is a private domain. That would be a prohibited transfer on Shabbos. However, if you have those partitions around the hole, it's as if they extend all the way down to the bottom of the lake. And now you're drawing water essentially from your own well. It's like you extended a tube into the lake that went down to the lake bottom, and any water that came up through it, it's like you're taking it from your own well, which, as we saw, would be subsumed into your own private domain, and it would be permitted to do on Shabbos. Pardon me, I really need to get a drink of water, and I've got a glass right here. And excuse me for not having thought of that earlier. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nihi b'divro. Okay. So if you've got the partitions, you can draw the water up through the hole. Now we're going to get another ruling, another leniency with respect to drawing water on Shabbos. And this one comes from Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. So Rabbi Chananya is going to say that if your balcony is sufficiently big, you're not going to need to make the partitions, right? So if you have a big balcony, you don't need to make the partitions. Why do you not need to make the partitions? Because there's enough material in the floor of the balcony itself that if you folded it up or down, it would serve as the partition. This is obviously a legal fiction and a leniency just so that you can draw water on Shabbos. So you have enough material to fold it, and what would that look like? Like that, right? So if you cut out the floor of your balcony and you folded it down, you could have folded it up, then it's as if you made the partitions around the hole, and then you would have that condition where you could extend the bucket through the hole, through the partitions, down to the water, draw the water back up, and it would be permitted on Shabbos, which if you didn't have such a hole in partitions would not be allowed. Here we don't have the partitions. We only have a balcony that's big enough that if we wanted to, we could make the partitions out of it. But according to Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, that is enough. That is enough. So that's to show you how lenient at least some of the sages will be. Not everybody holds like Rabbi Chananya. So this was like a pretty extreme leniency, but he was an authority in his region. What was his region? Northern Israel, near the Sea of Galilee. So the lake that we're discussing is actually a pretty large lake, at least for Israel is such a small country, that the Sea of Galilee constitutes a pretty large lake within such a small country. But that's where he lived, and he made a ruling for the residents of that area that if they have a big enough balcony, they can make a hole in it. They don't need to make this special structure. Who knows? I don't even know why he did it, but he did it. Okay? So that was his ruling. And then Rabbah says, oh, okay, well, if we look at these two rulings that Rabbi Yehuda said, in the well between two courtyards, all we need is the wall over it. We don't have to actually extend the wall down. That's not the law. That's Rabbi Yehuda's lenient ruling. And Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, he's also so lenient. It's like these two guys are the same. They hold like each other. In being sort of extra lenient. Other rabbis disagreed with them, but he says that these two guys are extra lenient and they're actually saying the same thing, that it's as if we extend the walls down. Abaye answers Rabbah, well, no, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, they are both making leniencies, but they're making them for different reasons, and we shouldn't think that they hold the same as each other, and therefore we would expect that other rulings of theirs in other situations will square with each other. In fact, they had different reasons for their leniencies, and even Rabbi Yehuda might not agree with Rabbi Chananya's ruling that it's as if we would bend the partitions down to allow drawing water through a balcony over the Sea of Galilee. Because, with a well and a wall, okay, there's other times where we have this principle that if we have a suspended wall, we might extend down. That's not the only case where we do that. In fact, we do that here with the partitions around the balcony. And so he's saying that that's why he would allow he would rule that the wall over the well between two courtyards, it's as if we extended it down to the surface of the water. But he would not say that where there's no partitions at all, we're going to pretend that just because there's enough material in the floor of the balcony that we could pretend to bend it down and then extend it. Maybe Rabbi Yehuda doesn't go that far. Likewise, Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, he made his ruling only for the Sea of Galilee, not necessarily for other places and times and other bodies of water. What was special about the Sea of Galilee is that it was a very well-populated area. So, since there were towns with town enclosures all around the Sea of Galilee, he could make such a ruling for any buildings right on the lakefront of the Sea of Galilee, because that building is always necessarily going to be within some kind of Eruv. And it's not going to be a situation where there's a building that's just up against the sea and there's no further enclosure around it, which could happen with other bodies of water in other places in the world. And so just because he made this very lenient ruling for the residents of the Sea of Galilee doesn't mean he would make other lenient rulings in other times and places, like Rabbi Yehuda's situation about the wall over the well between two courtyards. And that's the end of our discussion of Mishnah number 6. Let's move on to Mishnah number 7. Okay, Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 8 of Tractate Eruvin. With regard to a water channel that passes through a courtyard. So now we're not talking about a well that's under the wall. Now we're talking about a stream or a water channel that passes through the middle of a courtyard. It comes under the wall at the edge, and then, it comes under one wall, passes right through the middle of the courtyard, and then goes out the other side. So that's the situation we're talking about now in this Mishnah. With regard to a water channel that passes through a courtyard, the residents may not draw water from it on Shabbos unless they erected for it a partition 10 handbreadths high at the entrance and at the exit of the courtyard. Rabbi Yehuda says, not surprisingly, if you have a wall around the courtyard and the stream comes in under the wall and goes out under the wall on the other side, you've got your partition 10 handbreadths high, and you don't need a special partition that goes down to the level of the water in the stream. That's Rabbi Yehuda's more lenient opinion. Rabbi Yehuda said, now he's saying to back up his more lenient opinion, that there was an incident involving a water channel that passed through the courtyards of the town of Avel, from which the residents would draw water on Shabbos by the authority of the elders, relying on the courtyard wall suspended above it. The rabbis who disagreed with Rabbi Yehuda said to him, it is due to the fact that that channel was not the size that requires a partition. In other words, the channel that went through the courtyard was not itself 10 handbreadths deep and 4 handbreadths wide. As we said, when we're talking about a well, it has to have that minimum dimensions. It can be bigger, but it has to have that minimum dimensions to require the partition and the adjustment, etc., that we've been talking about. So they said to Rabbi Yehuda, you can't bring a proof from this example in the town of Avel where they didn't require a special partition. Rather, they just allowed the wall to provide, to act as the partition, a wall that was already there, simply the wall of the courtyard, because the stream itself was not a significant enough stream. So rather, and we see here in a kind of a close-up, the law is, there's the stream that passes under the wall, and as you can see, they build an extra partition that extends down and reaches the surface of the water and probably goes under it a little bit as well. Let me get my notes here. Okay, so very good. So the next issue that comes up is that, okay, so then in trying to discuss, well, what really is necessary in terms of that partition at the end. Okay, we're going to extend the partition down from the wall. What are its requirements? So then we have another teaching, a Baraisa, contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but not as authoritative as a Mishnah, but close. And in the Baraisa, we have an example of a channel that goes near a house. And on Shabbos, the question is, can they draw water from the house directly from this channel? So that's going to look like this. Now there's no balcony involved, but rather the residents of this house that's on a channel are going to, throw a bucket and a rope down into the channel. Is that going to be permitted on Shabbos? That's the question that's being asked here. And the channel, okay, and then it says, and then let me get the exact wording, because this is what's interesting. So a water channel that passes between the windows of two houses, less than 3 handbreadths. One may lower a bucket from the window and draw water from it. 3 handbreadths or more, one may not lower a bucket and draw water from it. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says less than 4 handbreadths, one may lower a bucket. More than 4 handbreadths, one may not lower a bucket. So all it says is if it's 3 handbreadths or more, you can, if it's 3 handbreadths or less, you can draw a bucket from the water into the house. If it's more than that, you can't. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, the number is 4. Less than that, okay. More than that, not. But what is that measure referring to? Is it referring to the width of the channel, the width of that stream? Is it referring to the distance of the stream, the edge of the stream, to the house? Those are the two possibilities that the Gemara first explores. And then they conclude, no, it's not talking about the width of the stream for various reasons. And then they say, so it must be the width of the embankment. But if the width of the embankment is less than 4 handbreadths wide, so then this is an unusual area. It's going to be between domains, but it's going to be smaller than 4 handbreadths. So we said that something is neither a private domain nor a public domain, right? It's between this channel and between this house. It's not in a courtyard. It's simply that there's a channel out, and let's say that this house is on the edge of the courtyard. Beyond the courtyard is not a courtyard. It's just, out there. And there's a channel that runs near the courtyard. If the distance between the channel and the house is less than 4 handbreadths, then the embankment itself is an exempt area. It's not a public domain, and it's not a private domain. It's not larger than 4 handbreadths, and so it's not going to be a Carmelis. It's smaller than that. It's not its own domain. What is it? It's an exempt domain. So an exempt domain is something you can transfer things in and out of an exempt domain on Shabbos. So is the issue that we're going to go from the stream through an exempt domain and then up to the window? The Gemara is going to prove that no, we're not allowed to do that. And the case that the reason we know that is a case that we studied a few weeks ago when we said, okay, there's 2 courtyards, there's a wall between them. It's a significant wall, so it's 4 handbreadths wide or more and 10 handbreadths high. Therefore, the top of that wall is its own domain. It's 4 handbreadths wide or more, so it's going to be its own private domain. And it's going to be prohibited to both sides. What if it's less than 4 handbreadths wide? Are we going to be able to make use of the top of that wall? Several rabbis said no, but Rabbi Yochanan said yes. It's an exempt domain, so you can bring food from your courtyard, sort of, jump up on the wall, sit on the wall, and eat your lunch while you're sitting on top of that wall in that exempt domain. That's going to be permitted. However, said Rabbi Yochanan, you can't then take that food that you brought with you to the top of the wall and give it to your friend in the other courtyard. Remember, these 2 courtyards don't have a joint Eruv. There is no permission to carry objects from one courtyard to the other. You can't make use of the exempt domain between them, even though it's accessible to both courtyards. You can use the exempt domain. This is often referred to as a place where you can take your load off your shoulder and rest it there for a moment before picking it back up and moving on. You can carry something in your own courtyard if there's an Eruv on that side. You can rest it on the top of the wall, which is an exempt domain, but you can't then pick it up again and transfer to the other courtyard. You can't use an exempt domain to transfer from one place to another. Therefore, the embankment between the stream and the house may be an exempt domain, but that's not going to justify taking water from the stream and pulling it up into the house. So what were they talking about in the Baraisa? If it's 3 handbreadths or less, it's permitted. If it's 4 handbreadths or less, it's permitted according to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. But if it's more than that, it is not permitted. Answer, what they're talking about is this. You have to make a partition that extends down from the wall of the courtyard into the stream of water that crosses through the courtyard. But maybe you don't want to block the stream so that you want the water to flow in and flow out. So you can have a gap in that partition, but the gap can only be 3 handbreadths or less. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it can be up to 4. And that's because of the concept of lavud, which we've seen before. If 2 partitions come within 3 handbreadths of each other, it's as if they're one solid partition. It's considered close enough and they're connected. That's called lavud. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, his source for that law is a little bit different. And so he holds the same idea. If they're close enough, it's as if they're connected. But he's even a little more lenient, and he says as long as they're within 4 handbreadths of each other, it's as if they are connected. So that's what we learned from the Baraisa, is how you make a partition to allow drawing from a stream that passes through a courtyard. You need partitions at either end. They need to extend down into the water. There can be a gap in between the 2 sides of the partition, but that gap can only be up to 3 partitions according to the rabbis. According to Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, just a little bit more. 4 partitions is an okay gap. That's our discussion of Mishnah 7. I am almost done. If you've got questions or comments, definitely put them in the comments now. I'm about to get to that. We're just going to open our discussion of Mishnah number 8. And here we're going to learn a little bit more again about Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya and the leniencies that he put into place for the residents of the Sea of Galilee, around the Sea of Galilee, and only for them. This is Mishnah number 8. With regard to a balcony that extends over a body of water, if a hole was opened in the floor, its residents may not draw water from it through the hole on Shabbos unless they erected for it a partition 10 handbreadths high around the hole. So this is the Mishnah that tells us this. We've been discussing it a few times. Right, there we go again. And now it adds, and it is permitted to draw water by means of that partition, whether it is positioned above the balcony, in which case the partition is seen as descending downward, or whether it is placed below the balcony and also seen to extend downward. And likewise, with regard to 2 such balconies, one above the other, if they erected a partition for the upper balcony, but they did not erect one for the lower one, the residents of both are prohibited from drawing water through the upper one unless they establish an Eruv between them. So they need a common Eruv for the people of the lower balcony. It doesn't mean beneath, like they're directly one above the other, but rather that one is lower than the other. So in order to make use of the other balcony, here they're on the same level in this figure, but you can imagine one being a little bit higher than the other. As long as they're within 10 handbreadths of difference in height, they can be ruled like one courtyard, and they need an Eruv between them in order for the residents of the lower balcony to send their bucket up to the upper balcony and through the hole and draw water. That would be in a case where the lower balcony, imagine one is higher than the other, and one of the balconies didn't have these partitions, did not have the partitions. That's the Mishnah. The first comment on that Mishnah from the Gemara is, well, apparently this Mishnah does not accord with the ruling of Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. Because Chananya ben Akavya, as we just saw in the previous discussion, does not require, or the 2 discussions ago, he does not require that you have those physically built partitions. If you have a big enough balcony with a hole in it, it's as if you had enough material and you folded those strips of floor down to form those partitions, or you folded them up to form those partitions, says the Gemara. Correct. It is not accorded with Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya. He issued a leniency. The other rabbis don't agree with it. So his leniency was good, apparently, for his time and place and the residents of the Sea of Galilee, but was not accepted by the sages for other times and places. But having mentioned this leniency of Rabbi Chananya ben Akavya, the Gemara now shares 2 other leniencies. One has to do with the way that you insulate food in the husks of legumes on Shabbos, which we're not going to discuss. And the second one, or the third one, having these 2 leniencies, one about the partitions of the balcony, one about insulating food on Shabbos. And the third one was that the residents who lived around the Sea of Galilee on Shabbos could use a towel. Why did he have to say that they can use a towel? That doesn't sound like something you need a rabbinic ruling that is a leniency for, does it? Yes, it does. And if you tune in at our next show, you'll find out why. And that show will not be tomorrow. There's no AT Daily tomorrow because there are going to be 2 broadcasts. Nina posted about it, I think yesterday, the day before. She'll put it again in the comments. But she is going to be giving a live show tomorrow, I believe at 5 p.m. Pacific rather than 6. She's also going to be first part of a Partners in Torah influencer Zoom, where she and 8 other prominent Jewish women influencers in the Jewish world are going to be as part of the Shabbos Project and in partnership with the Shabbos Project and Partners in Torah, discussing not only how to make challah, but the spiritual significance of challah, and sharing some other amazing stories. That's going to be an amazing discussion. That's at 3 p.m. Pacific. And you can register for that Zoom meeting. Nina will put the link there. That's going to be through the Partners in Torah website. Then at 5 p.m. Pacific, Nina is going to go live on Facebook through Accidental Talmudist, and she is going to give a clinic, a master class, I should say, in how to bake challah. If you've never made challah, or even if you yourself are a master, I know you'll benefit from seeing how Nina makes challah, because it's the most delicious challah in the world. It's amazing. The kids and I feel so blessed to eat it every week. So really you want to see how she makes challah. But also, in addition to how good the challah, how good it tastes, Nina puts a lot of spiritual intention into baking the challah. And she's going to discuss that, the mindfulness and intentionality and the spiritual oomph that goes into the challah that she makes. And she'll be talking about that in her live show. That's going to be at 5 p.m. tomorrow. That's going to be enough broadcast for one day. So AT Daily will be back with our next page, page 88, here in Tractate Shabbos. And then I'll explain why it took a special leniency for people to be able to use a towel on Shabbos. Hint, it has to do with bathing in the Sea of Galilee. All right, let's see comments and questions. Wait a minute, I made a mistake. Her live show is at 6 p.m. I just said it was 5 and I was mistaken. Her show is at 6 p.m. Tomorrow, and then she's got that in the comments. You could see that right now, and it appears that there are no other comments or questions over there on the Facebook or YouTube side. So that's what I've got for us today. You definitely want to check out Nina's show tomorrow, the earlier one at 3 p.m. Pacific as part of that influencer group, and then her own show at 6 p.m., the time of AT Daily, from our kitchen, and I'll just be the guy behind the camera, but reading your comments if you have comments or questions for her. All the best, my holy sisters